What's up, y'all? Welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Amber, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about what happens when God elevates you. We're going to be reading about the Shunammite woman in 2 Kings chapter 8. This is one of my favorite stories in the Bible. I don't know why, I just love it. And I really hope that you have an open heart and an open mind as you listen to this video. And I hope too that you will stick around and watch it in its entirety, not just to support my analytics, but rather to listen to what God has to say to you. Before we do that, I just want to take a quick second to pray over us, and then we're going to dive right on in. Father God, I just come before you right now. God, I pray for this person on the other side of the screen watching this video. God, I ask that you would speak through me to them. Father, you know what they're in need of, and you know what they need to hear. You know how they need to be encouraged. God, you know how they need to be convicted. And Lord, I just pray that you would use me as your servant and as your tool. It's in Christ's name that I pray. Amen. All right, so let's go ahead and read the passage. Elisha had told the woman whose son he brought back to life, "Take your family and move to some other place, for the Lord has called for a famine on Israel that will last 7 years." So the woman did as the man of God instructed. She took her family and settled in the land of the Philistines for 7 years. After the famine ended, she returned from the land of the Philistines, and she went to see the king about getting back her house and land. As she came in, the king was talking with Gehazi, the servant of the man of God. And Gehazi was telling the king about the time Elisha had brought a boy back to life. At that very moment, the mother of the boy walked in to make her appeal to the king about her house and land. "Look, my lord the king," Gehazi exclaimed, "here is the woman now, and this is her son, the very one Elisha brought back to life." "Is this true?" the king asked her, and she told him the story. So he directed one of his officials to see that everything she had lost was restored to her, including the value of any crops that had been harvested during her absence. I've titled this message, "You Can Have It Back." And I believe you might not see it right now, but I believe reading this story really touches on the different steps and the process that we go through as children of God when He is elevating us, when He is taking us from a lower position to a higher position. Now, before I jump into my 3 points, because, gotta have 3 points, I want to give y'all some context. I kind of want y'all to understand what's happening here. This same woman, she's known as the Shunammite woman, or the woman from Shunem. She's mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 4, and the prophet Elisha stays with this woman and her husband at their house. So whenever he is in Shunem, this is the family he stays with. They show him hospitality. They have a whole room for Elisha, okay? They have a whole room designated for him. They cook for him, all this stuff. So one day he's talking to her and he's asking her, what is it that you want? And so she tries to, beat around the bush, but she finally tells him, I really want a son. And so she winds up having a son a year later. And one day the boy, while he's still young, he gets sick and he actually dies. And whenever he dies, she goes to find Elisha. She's distressed and she's frantic. Her son just died. And so long story short, Elisha is able to bring her son back through the power of God. And so, this is somebody who Elisha probably sees as a friend, maybe even more like family. And so whenever we get to chapter 8, we notice here that the story focuses on the Shunammite woman and her son. So the assumption is that her husband has passed at this point, okay? It's just her and her son. And Elisha sends word to her because he's a prophet, okay? He sends word that, hey, where you live, there's going to be a famine. It's going to last 7 years. So I need you to get out of there. And I need you to go somewhere else. And so this is the first point that I want to make whenever God brings us through a season or process of elevation. And the first point I want to make is that the prerequisite to elevation, I forgot what I was going to say because I wasn't looking at my notes. The prerequisite to elevation are two things: obedience and sacrifice. This woman had to decide, am I going to listen to Elisha and leave, or am I going to stay? Let me tell you, you can guarantee, you can bet your bottom dollar that whenever you follow Jesus, whenever you want to pursue the calling that God has for your life, it's going to require obedience and sacrifice. Obedience and sacrifice. It's going to require both. You see, everybody wants to elevate. Everybody wants to do something big. Everybody wants to flex. But two things people don't want to do is to follow instruction and do hard things. But God requires us to be obedient, to listen to him, and to give up something. Okay? And I also want to just tell you this as a spoiler alert. Whenever you follow God, whenever you follow the call he has for your life, this is something you are going to continue to do over and over and over and over again. You know, it's funny when people see how another person is living. And they say, oh man, that's a nice house. That's a nice car. You know, man, they just got it like that. What people don't know, though, is the backstory. We don't always know what a person had to go through, what they had to give up, what they had to do that was extremely hard. We just see the end result and we want to celebrate that. But, you know, I think about my own life. And I think about where I am right now. You know, whenever I was 14 years old, I decided I wanted to be a sports reporter because I was not athletic. I didn't participate in any extracurricular activities, but I knew I was great at talking. I knew I was a great communicator. And so I decided this is what I'm going to do with my life. But I remember not getting into the college I wanted to get into. I remember the Lord saying, Amber, I've called you to full-time ministry. I remember God telling me, I almost said asking me, but telling me, you know, you have to give those gifts back to me and I'm going to put them on a shelf. And when I say gifts, I mean the ability to create content. You know, whenever I was 15 years old, I was learning how to edit video. I was learning how to write scripts. I was learning videography, photography. I was learning a lot of things and I loved it. I loved it so much. But I remember a time in my life where God said, I need you to give those things back to me. And I remember not knowing if I would ever get those things back. I guess in a more practical way, it looked like, okay, I don't know if I'm ever going to use those things again or be able to do those things again. I had no idea. But I knew that I had to trust God and I knew I needed to follow him and I had to make a sacrifice in that. The second point I want to share with you is that when God is bringing you through a process of elevation, he will bring you into a season of solitude. He will bring you into a place where it's just you and him. It is you and him. And I know the way I'm saying that kind of sounds weird. It should be beautiful, right? Well, it is beautiful. It's beautiful. But let me tell you something. There's a lot going on with that, because it can be full of discomfort, and it can be a little lonely, and it can make you feel as if you're missing out. If you notice in the story, the Shunammite woman had to leave her home for 7 years. I think about when my husband and I had to evacuate last year after Hurricane Ida, and we had to leave our home for 2 weeks. It's like, well, whenever we go back, do we have a home? Is there a home to go to? Are we going to be homeless? What's going to happen? So here this woman is having to leave her home to go somewhere she's not familiar with. Understand this too. Context is key. She was a widow. Back during this time, women did not have value and they did not have rights. And so it's like, great, now I have to go somewhere where people don't know me and I don't have a husband. The story doesn't tell us her circumstances and how she was living and what she was going through, but I imagine that it had to be extremely hard. And then here she is with her son. I believe that there's something humbling about when God uproots you out of what you know and what you're comfortable with, what you're familiar with, and then he places you somewhere that is totally foreign to you. It makes you become more vulnerable. It makes you take off the mask. For some people, they put on a mask because it's like, great, I can reinvent myself. But not in this context. I remember being in a season of solitude. I remember whenever I gave God my gifts back, I started seeing other people learning content creation. Now it's like $1 billion, maybe a multi-billion-dollar industry, social media. You know, all these people all of a sudden start learning the things that I already knew to do. By the way, I was not an expert. I could just do a little something. But I remember having that fear of missing out. I remember being like, wow, like imagine how far ahead I could have been if I could have stayed where I was. The Shunammite woman had to be thinking about that as she's in Philistia. You know, she had to be thinking, man, if I would have just stayed home, I would have so much more money, so much more comfort. Everything would just be settled and I would have stability. That's the way that I thought too. But God had to uproot me a couple of times. And you know what he's doing? You see, before God can take you out of hiding, because really when you're in a season of solitude, you're in a season of being hidden. And there are things that God needs you to work on. Whatever you do not allow God to deal with you on privately, you might end up having to deal with it publicly. So it would be wise of us to handle our business with him behind the scenes, right? But y'all, we're human. We struggle. We don't always remember the bad things either. You know, whenever we reminisce on our past or opportunities or things we could have done, you know, a lot of times we think about the good things. Think about this lady. She was probably like the people of Israel that when they were led out and things got hard, they said, man, I should have stayed in Egypt. I should have just stayed a slave. You know, maybe she was thinking, I know there's a famine back home, but to be home would be better than to be here. I want y'all to know that whenever God is elevating you, whenever that's his plan for you, if he's calling you to be a leader, which I believe as Christians, we're all called to be leaders. But if God's going to entrust you with something, he has to be able to trust you first. And in this time of being with him, you get to know him more. You allow him to refine and mold you into the person he wants you to be. It's so worth it. So do not look at this as something shameful. Do not try to skip this part either. Don't try to take a shortcut. Let him work in you. The last part of the elevation process, the last thing we experience when God is elevating us or will elevate us, is that he will release us in his own timing, and he will supply our needs. I love this part of the story when the Shunammite woman goes back to her homeland. I forgot to tell y'all who Gehazi is in this story. Gehazi is the assistant to Elisha. And I hope I said his name correctly. If I didn't, oh well. But look, he's the assistant to Elisha. He's like his right hand. And Gehazi was there when Elisha brought this woman's son back to life. He was there. And so he's talking to the king because the king wants to know, he's heard about Elisha and he's curious about this man. And as they're talking, it's the 7th year and it's time for her to go back. This is where my title ties in with the story. This is the part where God says to this woman, okay, you can have it back. You can have it back. You can go back now. It's time for me to release you. It's time for you to go back. You've been in hiding 7 years in a place. Don't nobody know you. And now it's time for you to return. It's time for you to go back. I'm releasing you. You can have it back now. And so she goes back home and they're talking about her. They're talking about her. Good things. Gehazi is sharing what Elisha did for this woman and her son. And she wasn't just there. Her son is there too. It could not have been better. This woman is probably on her way to the king with so much anxiety and bad nerves. We can't even imagine. And she's trying to figure out, what am I going to say? How am I going to say it? What if I don't get my land back? Oh my gosh. And see, another thing, looking at the context of this story, is that whenever a person vacated their property, the government went in to seize it. And, they would give it back to you, to the rightful owner. If you come back, they give it back. But remember, she was a widow. Her husband is not around. We believe he's passed on. And so she's probably trying to figure out, what am I going to do? And so she comes ready to plead her case. And instead, the king assigns one of his officials to her case. And he says, don't just give her her land back, but let's also reimburse her all the income that she should have acquired during these last 7 years. I love that. I just love that. God blessed this woman's obedience. He blessed her. He blessed her for being obedient. He blessed her for making a sacrifice. He blessed her for trusting him, because ultimately it was God speaking through Elisha telling her, I want you to leave for 7 years. I want you to go. And she did something very hard. She did something that required so much faith, and God blessed her for it. I like to look at sacrifices as exchanges, because in my experience, every time I've given God something that he gave me, when I give it back to him, he always comes around and gives me something so much better. He gives me something so much better. I know earlier I was telling y'all how I wanted to be a sports reporter. And that was my dream. And God asked me to give him back my gifts. And I did. And it was a good 10 years before I got back into what I'm doing now. Now I have a YouTube channel, right? But I remember the day the Lord spoke to me and said, I want you to start a YouTube channel. I remember being shocked. I was so shocked. But in that moment, it's as if God was saying, okay, you were obedient to me. You did what I asked of you. And now I'm giving this back to you. You can have it back. And guess what, y'all? I'm a much better steward now than I would have been if God never did that. I am not the same person I used to be. I no longer hold the selfish ambition. I no longer crave the spotlight. I no longer want to live a life that's all about self-indulgence or being self-indulging. I don't even know if I said that right. That's not me anymore. Now I use my gifts for the glory of God. So if that's you, I don't know where you are in this process. I don't know where you are or what you're dealing with, but I want you to know that you can trust the process. And I want you to know that no matter where you are in it, you can trust that what God is doing is a good thing. I want you to stay the course, remain steadfast, persevere, and endure. It is so worth it. It is so worth it. Well, that's all I have for y'all today. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you are open to it, I want you to comment below. And I want you to tell me where you're at. You know, are you facing a tough decision? Are you having to choose whether or not you're going to be obedient to God or do your own thing? What's God asking you to give to Him? What's He asking for you to sacrifice? Maybe for some of you, you're in a season of solitude. It's just you and God. Or maybe you sense that God is now calling you to come out of hiding. I want you to share it with me. If you have not subscribed to my YouTube channel yet, please do. I would love for you to join us here on our online community. We are all about being real and authentic and transparent. You know, we keep it real over here. And then also give this video a thumbs up, share it with a friend, all that good stuff. And you know what? I'm gonna see y'all next time. And I want y'all to continue to seek righteousness and goodness. Y'all take care.